Bueno, si ves bien de lejos lo puedes ver en la pantalla.
Sí.
Voy a traer uno para mí. Voy a traerme uno para...
Now as a president, you're reminiscing about your days as a secretary.
Okay, good morning to all of you, to our colleagues, and all the people who are attending this defense, in which Pablo Moreno Spiegelberg will present his PhD work, the spatiotemporal dynamics of coastal Mediterranean ecosystems, under the supervision of Professor Gumila and the tutor, Dr. Maria Rosa Lopez Gonzalo. If you are ready, you can start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gaetana. Well, as she introduced, I'm Pablo Moreno Spiegelberg. I'm here to defend my thesis that is entitled Spatiotemporal Dynamics of Coastal Mediterranean Ecosystem and was supervised by Damia Gomila. First of all, I want to thank the committee for being here today and also all my friends, family, and colleagues that are also here. So, well, I will start explaining a little bit why, well, this thesis is what I think is relevant. Introducing a little bit what coastal ecosystems. So coastal ecosystems are ecosystems that occur in the interface between land and sea. They englobe a lot of different systems like estuaries, mangroves, almaces, seagrass meadows, or coastal reefs. And they provide a lot of critical ecosystem services, like the protection of the shoreline, water filtration, carbon storage, or nurturing of a lot of marine species. However, coastal ecosystems are very vulnerable to anthropogenic stressors, like coastal development, pollution, eutrophication, global warming in different shapes, And in particular, the Mediterranean ecosystems are even more vulnerable to these stressors for several reasons. First of all, there is nearly landlocked. It only have connection with the ocean through the Gibraltar Strait. And therefore, it have very little water exchange, and the species that live in the Mediterranean do not have very easy migration routes in case the situation if there locally gets very difficult for them. Also, this region is warming faster than most of the other marine ecosystem in the world, and also is very susceptible to invasive species, especially after the expansion of the Suez Canal in the 15th. And the main key habitat forming species in the Mediterranean grows very slow. So any damage that this ecosystem might take takes many time, even centuries, to reverse. So in this thesis, we talk about two of these ecosystems. First of them is seagrasses meadow. In particular, the one I focus the most during the thesis is the Posidonia oceanica. This is a group of marine flowering plants that create these very dense meadows. This is a meadow of Posidonia. They support a lot of biodiversity, and they fix CO2, they protect the coasts, they have a lot of ecological services. And in the case of Posidonia oceanica, they grow very slow because they have a clonal reproduction, or it's the main kind of reproduction that they use, where a plant, the different sorts of the plant are come out from the rhizome, and the rhizome elongates through the apex. And this elongation is very, very, very slow. It grows like some centimeters per year in the case of Posidonia. So you can imagine how long it takes from one of these very big meadows to grow. Also, these Posidonia oceanica and other seagrasses are very sensible to environmental change, like sea warming or introduction of pollutants. And for this reason, it's an ecosystem in recession, not only in the Mediterranean in general, but also here in the Balearic Island in particular. And also, something that will be important for this thesis is that they have this formation of these kind of patterns that have been associated with the production of sulfides during the decomposition of the plant or the biomass in anaerobic conditions. So during the decomposition, these sulfides are created, they are fixed in the substrate, and then this substance is toxic for the plant, inhibiting the growth or even killing the plant. So about Posidonia oceanica or seagrasses, in this thesis I focus in two main topics. First of all is this that I just introduced a little bit, is the formation of this excitable, behavior in this ecosystem, which is not compatible with the classical framework that is used for describing excitable systems. That is usually a type 2. So in this system, we develop a new theory to try to explain how these kind of patterns emerge in the case of Posidonia oceanica or other similar systems. Secondly, we talk about mixed meadow because the interaction between plants in seagrass meadow is an important mechanism. There are some plants that form mixed meadows in some conditions. In others, they form separated meadows of just one species. And in this thesis, we present a model for this interaction between seagrasses. And in particular, we study in much detail a simplification of the model that is a symmetric case where two very similar plants interact. The second ecosystem that we study in this thesis is Gorgonia forest. In particular, we focus in Paromorhizea clavata, that is a species endemic from the Mediterranean. These species are soft corals. They are built up by these little polyps. Polyp is an individual, and they grow by clonal reproduction, creating these kind of tree-like shape colonies, which are the corals. And these colonies also reproduce sexually, creating more of these colonies, no? Until they create these very dense populated communities of corals that can have up to, I don't know, 30 colonies per meter square or something like that. So they're highly populated. Well, they act as an ecosystem engineer. They provide habitat for multiple species. They have very slow growth, also like 1 centimeter per year, more or less, in the case of the colony. And they reproduce very slowly sexually also. And they have also very limited dispersal capability. So usually when they reproduce, the new colony appears very close to the parents. And they are extremely vulnerable to heat waves and storms. In the case of these gorgonians, we wanted to study the demography of these communities of many colonies because they saw some interesting patterns. In particular, they saw this process of self-thinning that is also typical in other kind of ecosystem like forest or usually sessile species that can grow very big. And during this process, when they compete for resources, the system goes from many individuals with low biomass to less individual but with bigger biomass. No? So the biomass concentrates in very few individuals, even the biomass of the whole ecosystem is growing. Secondly, we are also interested in this kind of atypical size distribution that is shown in this species, where the peak, well, here we have the density of colonies of different size, and the peaks of this distribution is for intermediate sizes, which is a little bit weird at first moment when you look at this, because what you would expect in a demographic model is something a little bit more like this. This is a different species of coral. This is wild coral, where the most dominant class is a small one. No? In this case, well, the ones that are dying or growing are substituted by the smallest one. So in this thesis, we also derivate a demographic model for Paramythea clavata to reproduce these two behaviors. So this talk and the thesis is going to be organized like this. First of all, I will talk about excitability, presenting a general type 1 excitable media model, and also how the pulses appear in this framework. Secondly, I will talk, well, this is related with chapter 2 of the text, the thesis. Secondly, I will talk about a minimal excitable plant soil system, where we study these spatiotemporal patterns and also the resilience of the ecosystem in this framework that is related with chapter 3. Secondly, I will talk about mixed meadows, multi-specific cigarette bed, that is related with chapter 4. And finally, about Gorgonians community, which is related with chapter 5 of the thesis. So let's start with the beginning, with the general type 1 excitable media model. And well, first of all, what is excitability? So if we have, we say that one system is excitable, for example, a system defined by a system of ordinary differential equations. If we have a rest state, here represented as this black line here, this rest state is stable. So if we make a small perturbation on it, this perturbation will decay and will go down to the rest state. Nevertheless, if we make the perturbation large enough that is above a given threshold, it will make a large excursion through the phase space, after which it will go back again to this rest state. No? So we have these two behavior mediated by the threshold. No? It's a threshold-like behavior. Typically, this kind of systems or this kind of behavior occurs after the destruction of a large scale, large amplitude cycle. And depending how this cycle is destroyed, we can classify excitable system in different categories or different types. So in type 2 excitability, usually the cycle is destroyed with a finite period. So there is finite period in the moment of destruction. This usually occurs in a Hopf bifurcation with a Carnot. Carnot is this behavior of a slow, fast system where the amplitude of the cycles grows really fast after the creation. And for this to happen, it needs to have a very big difference of time scales between the different variants of the system. So they should be a slow, fast system to show this kind of behavior. In this kind of systems, the type 2 excitable systems, the threshold is not very well defined. Here they have a pseudo threshold. Here is shown as this dotted green line. And if the difference of time scales is bigger, this threshold gets more thinner, closer to a threshold behavior. So it's also related with this slow fast dynamics. Also, the duration of the excitation do not depend too much on initial conditions, but is mostly dominated by the dynamics of the slow variable. In contrast, the type 2 excitability, and in this case, the cycle is destroyed in a bifurcation where the period of the oscillation diverges, typically an sneak or a saddle loop bifurcation. This bifurcation do not need the system to have a slow fast dynamics. So type 1 excitability do not need this kind of dynamics. They have a very well defined threshold. In this case is shown here in this diagram as the green line. And the duration of the excitation highly depends on the initial condition. So if you get very close to the threshold, it will take much longer to complete all the cycle. So what happens when we add space to this kind of system? No? If we include a spatial coupling to our excitable system, we will expect that if we make a local perturbation to our system, this perturbation will travel up and down following this dynamics, something close to that. And also it will excitate the neighbors. So this excitation will propagate. This is what we expect, no? That we will do something like this. No? And it appears this kind of pulses that propagates the excitation through the media. This has been very well studied in type 2 excitability, where the appearance of these very square-like pulses is well known in the literature. And it also be applied to many systems like heart tissue, where the stability of this kind of pulses is associated with some kind of heart illness like tachycardia or fibrillation. And also chemical reaction, where some behavior of chemical reactions have been associated with this kind of behavior. It has been so successful that type 2 excitability has been used as a reference to describe any excitable media so far. Nevertheless, recently, some systems have been studied where this kind of framework is not do not describe well the behavior. No, this is the case, for example, of vegetation patterns. Here we have high altitude wetlands in Chile. Some theoretical work where this kind of moon-shaped pulses appear and travel, and also these. Well, in the coast of China, this kind of rings that appear. No? And of course, also in Posidonia, that is the main interest of this talk. So in this paper of Danny Ruiz-Reynés, they associate the creation of these pulses with some autotoxic behavior of the plant. And all these pulses are not compatible with the type 2 excitable description, because the rest state is the bare solution, so the solution without plant, which cannot go through a Hopf bifurcation, because then you will need negative plant densities. No? So it's not cannot work that way. No. Because of that, in this talk, we will try to see if type 1 excitable pulses, how can they form in this kind of system, and if we can relate the bifurcation that creates this kind of pulses with local bifurcation of the system without spatial coupling. No? So the connection between, in this case, for example, the homoclinic bifurcation and the formation of pulses. So to do so, we go to a very general system, this codimension 3 Takens-Bogdanov with 3 equilibria. That is a normal form that have a description of type 1 excitability through many vias. So it can describe the formation of these excitable trajectories through a SNCC and also a saddle loop. Well, we studied it for some parameters, and we found this region where the excitable behavior is found. Here is in gray. I think it maybe too clear for the Thomas light, but in this region here we find this kind of behavior, which is limited by the SNCC here, and also here by a saddle loop. We added space to this system, and spatial coupling, and we found that while making perturbations for the right parameters, in this case I have here, this is a space, this is time, and this is one of the variables of the system, u. So given an initial condition, a Gaussian initial conditions, in this case, that are localized here, 2 pulses are created and travel in opposite directions. No? These pulses do not change their shape while they move. They have a constant velocity, and therefore we can parameterize them just by the velocity. So we studied the region in the parameter space where these pulses are stable, here in blue, and also we studied the boundaries of this region. No? Here, this is the pulse that is in this region, and when we leave this region through different size, we get different kind of behavior. No? Here is an oscillating pulse. This is a pulse that decays, goes back to the rest state at some moment. This backfiring process, which can create these kind of more symmetries or coherent patterns, or sometimes maybe some more turbulence or chaotic behavior, or well, these kind of oscillations of the homogeneous solution with some kind of defect in the middle. So, in the boundaries of this region, we studied how the pulses are created there. In particular, this is the bifurcation that will be important for next chapter, the T point. So here we see that when we move in the parameter space, this is one of the parameters, mu1. This is the velocity of the pulse. Here we have our stable excitable pulse. And while we approach to the T point, they start to develop this plateau on the back of the pulse that grows until it diverges in the T point, where it can be described as these 2 fronts with an infinite plateau in the middle. From there, another kind of solution emerge that are unstable pulses, which can be followed until we arrive to the temporal saddle loop bifurcation, or the bifurcation that created the local excitability at first place. This convergence here occurs for infinite velocity, so yeah, where the local dynamics are recovered from the moving spatial dynamic system framework. We also studied other kind of behaviors close to other bifurcation, close to the SNCC bifurcation that generates the excitability. The pulses are destroyed as a node of separatorist loop bifurcation. And we also were able to connect the formation of these pulses with other kind of structures, in this case, localized steady states, from where the pulses emerge in a drift picture bifurcation. So this is the end of the presentation of the chapter 2. We introduced this general reaction diffusion model, which ODEs exhibit type 1 excitability. We saw that traveling pulses exist in a part of the excitable regime. And we map the stability region of the boundaries of the traveling pulses to some bifurcation, as a separator loop, T-point, drift pitchfork, and Hopf bifurcation of pulses. And finally, we connect the spatial bifurcation with the purely temporal counterpart. So this is the end of the first part of this talk. Now I'm going to talk about a minimal excitable blind solve system. Here we go again to this kind of Posidonia patterns. Well, they were very well described in this paper. Nevertheless, we wanted to make a little bit more minimalistic approach to this because, well, these models includes a lot of biologically relevant mechanisms that are not crucial for the formation of the pulses. So we wanted to study it in a more simple system. So we studied this. Well, this is a diagram of the model I'm going to study here. So we have the plant, and we put positive feedback on it. So the presence of plant somehow favor the creation of new plants or the survival of the surrounding plants. But also the plants generate this toxin that get fixed in the soil, and that eventually can harm or kill the plant itself. No? So we have this positive feedback here, and this negative feedback mediated by the toxin. This diagram is also compatible with many models in the literature. So we are not the first people doing this. But we try to do it simple and to study the formation of structures in this system. So the model reads like this. We have two partial differential equations, one for the plant's density, another for the toxin concentration. In the plant density equation, we have a natural death growth term, the positive feedback, divided by this term here, a saturation term, so the densities are controlled in the model, the toxin effect that affect negative to the plant, and also a diffusion term for the propagation of the plant in space, the spatial coupling. The toxins are generated by the plant density, and in absence of plant, it decays exponentially to zero. This model in the adimensional form have only three parameters that will be whipped. The mortality term. This one is the ratio between the positive and negative feedback. And the tau here that gives the ratio between the time scales of the toxin dynamics and the plant dynamics. No? So in this part of the thesis, we fix these two parameters, tau and alpha, for the Posidonia oceanica, and we take omega as our control parameter. So in the local dynamics, what we see in this system is that we have well, some homogeneous steady solutions. He's shown as green lines. This is the mortality, more mortality here and less mortality here. And we see that this homogeneous solution destabilizes at some point two oscillations. So these stable cycles appear where the plants grow, then the toxin grow, and they start oscillating. This oscillation grows in amplitude with omega until eventually it is destroyed in a saddle loop bifurcation. After it, from here to the right, to the left, I don't know, we have excitable behavior. So we have a threshold. If we put more plants at that threshold, it will grow, but it will eventually decay to the burstoid. So here, any initial condition will end up in a buried state without plants. So plants will eventually die here in the local system. What happens when we add the space? Well, as we see a little bit in the previous chapter, this kind of excitable pulses can appear when we add the space to excitable systems, which appear through a T-point bifurcation. No? So we have this connection through unstable pulses, and from here, these stable pulses appear that can survive for much higher mortality than the local dynamics. No? So the local dynamics end up here, but with these pulses, we can end up till here, no? Much higher than than the final tipping point of the local system, but also much higher than the existent region of the homogeneous solutions. Yeah. So we study also other kind of patterns in the system, in this case also wave trains, where we found the existence of this Buse balloon, where there are coexistence of different wave trains of different wavelengths, which also can survive in the regions where the local system is already, well, it will eventually die. There is not persistent solution there. This, well, sorry. We also find other kind of solutions that could be connected with some images of Posidonia in 2D. So for example, here we have this kind of behavior in Posidonia, no? And we can relate this kind of turbulent behavior with solution of our systems, no? The formation of this turbulence regime that can be connected with this not ordinary behavior in real meadows. Also, the formation of this kind of target patterns could be connected with two spirals of the model that creates this kind of concentric rings. This kind of this image here could be related with some kind of wave train behavior, like the one I'm showing here. And finally, of course, the formation of rings that were also previously studied in other studies that could be connected with this kind of rings. So this can be connected with some ecological studies, present ecology ideas. That is that spatial self-organization can serve as a resilient mechanism for ecosystems. So a classical view in this was that, well, we have our ecosystem. At some moment, we will have a T-point, and the formation of pattern is just a warning to tell us that, well, we are very close to this point, after which the system will collapse. Nevertheless, some new approach to this problem shows that, well, we actually, through the coexistence of different patterns, we can avoid the tipping point and go through solutions that, well, can survive for longer, and also that the transition to the collapse of the ecosystem is not so abrupt. It happens little by little. There are many, well, theoretical and also numerical or mathematical system studies studying this kind of behavior. Most of them have been focusing stationary spatial patterns, or maybe also Turing patterns that move through a slope or an advection term. So we wanted to try to apply this framework to our system, where our patterns spontaneously move without the need of any advection term. So to study this, we make this simulation where we start changing the mortality little by little in a 2D system. And we see that the system goes through different behaviors while the mortality increases. At the beginning, it shows this turbulent behavior that I already showed a video before. Then some spirals start to appear. Spirals grows bigger. At some moment, they break up and they create this kind of wave trains that become flatter, flatter, flatter until eventually the system collapses. Here I'm showing the total biomass of the system, the mean biomass, times for long times. Blue is the mean biomass of the local system, that we see that how it goes down and it ends in the saddle loop bifurcation. And these black dots are the simulations of the spatial system. And we can see that the system with space can have much more biomass than the system without a space, and can survive for much higher values of mortality. So here I have some videos of the different regimes. I cannot stop too much on them, but here is the turbulence. Here we can see how these spirals start to form. These spirals, little by little, while we increase the mortality, they become bigger until they almost get all the system. At some moment, they break into wave trains, and these wave trains become flatter and start to be destroyed at some moment from the tips until the system goes to the bare state. So, well, in this part of the thesis, we introduce this excitable system for plant soils, well, from excitable behaviors, no, with positive feedback and immediate negative feedback. We saw that the homogeneous system undergo this type 1 excitability. It's the tipping point of the system. And in space, we see how these solitary pulses that emerge can persist above the tipping point of the local dynamics, and how the different self-organized patterns can increase the resilience of the ecosystem. And in particular, also we found this transition while increasing the mortality, no, from the effect turbulence to wave trains, finally to pulses, as increase the mortality or stress on the system. So, now we go to the second part of this talk about a multispecific seagrass bed. Here we wanted to study interaction between seagrasses because it might be interesting for some kind of problems, no? Like the invasive species, when a species arrives to a system where there is already some others, the interaction of this species with the native ones. It's important to understand how the system will evolve. Also, in a global changing scenario, the interaction between species can play an important role. For example, here in the Mediterranean, we have two different species, the Posidonia oceanica and the Cymodocea. Posidonia oceanica, I already talked a little bit. The point in between these two species is that Posidonia oceanica is a very strong plant, but is also vulnerable to hot temperatures. So in a scenario where heat waves or, well, in general, the temperatures of the sea are growing, a much more tolerant species can substitute Posidonia oceanica in some regions. No? And the interaction in between these two plants that do not mix in mixed mediums in the interface could be important to understand how the system will evolve. No? Finally, also we're interested in meadows composition. So there are some species that can coexist in some environments, but do not in others. And to understand why this happened, well, it's nice to have an idea of this. For example, here we have again the Cymodocea nodosa interacting with, in this case, is an algae, but it has very similar ecological behavior than a seagrass, which in some cases are found to coexist together, but sometimes also they create monospecific meadows. This has been studied by previous work by using microscopic models. So in this kind of models, they model the behavior of each plant individually and how they reproduce or die. And they made this kind of interaction system between different species. Here they are studying the interaction between two monospecific meadows, no? The interface. And we wanted to make something similar, but from the point of view of a macroscopic model, no? So PD or deterministic model. So we build up this system here. It's a little bit complicated with a lot of parameters. It's a generalization for two species of this model here, where we include a coupling between the mortality term of the two species, where we have, well, some parameters describing the intraspecific interaction, and some parameters describing the interspecific interaction. And in both cases, we consider also that this interaction is density dependent. No? So we can have some this term that dominates for low densities, and this term here that dominates for high densities of plants. Also, we have here this diffusion for the plants, that in this case is a little bit more complex than in the previous model that I saw. This is because this nonlinear term here, the nonlinear diffusion, emerged from the clonal reproduction of the seagrasses. No? This is derived in this paper. So, well, this model is a little bit, it's very complex. So we decided to study a simpler scenario. This model is where we have two very similar plants that interact with each other. So the interaction is symmetric. No? Plant A see itself as plant B see itself, and plant A see plant B as plant B sees plant 1. And we have these kind of equations here, no? After a dimensionalization. We have just three local parameters here. First of them is the branching and mortality, that is given by the parameter omega. Secondly, interaction for low densities, or this linear interaction term, where we have interaction within the same species that we consider always positive, and interaction between species that could be of facilitation or of competition. It is given by the parameter alpha, that is the ratio between the interspecific interaction and the interspecific interaction. So very big values of alpha will say that the interaction between a species is of much facilitation than the interaction within a species. For high densities of plant, we introduce this saturation term that is always negative, and is given by the parameter beta, that is the ratio between the saturation between and within plants. By fixing these two parameters, we found that you can be in 5 different scenarios. So for big values of beta, that is a lot of competition for high densities between plants, and low values of alpha, that is a competition between plants for low densities. We found this kind of, here I'm showing the total biomass of the system. We found monospecific meadows that when increasing mortality, they end up in a tipping point. If we decrease the value of beta, we can have for high densities these mixed meadows that coexist for some regions of the parameter with monospecific meadows. So we have this kind of hysteresis cycles here, where we have both kind of conditions. If we increase alpha, we found mixed meadows for all the existence of populated solutions. Increasing omega, this transition from monospecific meadows to mixed meadows here. And finally, for high values of beta, high values of alpha, that is maybe ecologically a little bit tricky, because we are saying that these plants interact very positive when they are in low densities, but very negative when they are in high densities. We find this kind of behaviors here, no? That in there, what we have for high mortalities, mixed meadows, at some moment they destabilize into oscillations. These oscillations eventually break up in a double heteroclinic bifurcation, and we go into, again, an excitable system, no? Where we can find in a space, spatiotemporal dynamics, something that is a little bit similar what we saw in previous chapters. So that's it's all for this part of the thesis. We generalize this single species PD system, including 2 different species that interact. We analyze the symmetric case, and we found out that by fixing alpha and beta and having omega as the control parameter, we can be in 5 different ecological scenarios with characteristic bifurcation diagrams. No? And in some of these scenarios, we saw this kind of abrupt and not reversible transitions, complex configurations that are not present if we cannot consider this interaction or the presence of density dependence in the interaction. So finally, the last part of the talk, that is about the demography of Orconia's communities. Here, just I remember because I told it at the beginning and it's a long time ago, we're working with Paramothea clavata, that is this coral that creates colonies and creates these communities of many of these colonies. They show this self-thinning behavior, that is a behavior that is found in many different systems, where the mean biomass is proportional to a power, it's a power law of the number of individuals. In some empirical results, they have claimed that this is -1/2 in many different taxa. So, well, this is usually called the Yoda's law. And, well, this transition from many small individuals to less but bigger individuals while the system grow in limitation of resources. These have been measured in Paramothea clavata meadows. So here they have some points showing the saturated communities, and they follow a similar line. Also, we studied this atypical site distribution of the colonies with this peak in the middle, no? That, as we will show, they are a little bit related when we consider competition for resources. We also include in our system, and we are studying extreme mortality events. So these communities are very vulnerable to episodic and large-scale impacts, no? Like storms or heat wave or trawling. And these events are the principal mortality for very big colonies. No? For example, here we saw this big colony that is dead, probably from a heat wave, close to another that, well, was lucky and didn't have any problem with this extreme mortality event. No? Also, these extreme mortality events are expected to increase in frequency and intensity during the next century due to global warming or direct human actions. So understand how they affect their communities or how these communities can recover from these events, well, it's interesting in this for this reason. So here I introduce our the first part of the model, that is the deterministic model. So we have our density of colonies of a given height that evolve following this equation, where we consider growth of the colonies, death of the colonies, also included reproduction. This term here, that is just that the colonies create small colonies with a given rate depending on their size and the resources available, and also these colonies compete for resources while they compete for the resources. No? Including all this in the model, we've found this kind of behavior, this kind of dynamics. So we have 3 different dynamics here. At the beginning, we find this profile selection period where where the colonies grow inside, and some moment they start growing exponentially because the resources are very abundant and they don't compete so much, until eventually the resources became limited. They start competing from them, and they change from this exponential growth to the self-thinning phase. No? where the number of plants, here is number of colonies, here is mean biomass of colonies, start to decrease, even if the total biomass is increasing through this process. In this self-thinning process, what we are saying is that, the structure of the community changes, and in a stop for being monotically decreasing to showing this peak here, that is a peak of plants that are growing, but no new colonies are being created in this process. No, so we have this kind of wave that is increasing in size. So this can be related with the typical distribution that we talked at the beginning. Also, during this process, the system fits pretty well the Yoda's law. I was surprised when I get this result because we didn't fit the parameters to get this. So I don't know if it's a general thing or it's just that we were lucky in our choice of parameters. But I would like to study this a little bit more because at least for me it's curious that we get so close to the exponent, no, of the Yoda law. We also introduced these extreme mortality events as uncorrelated shocks on the community, and we consider a survival probability that is lower for high size of corals. No? So high size of coral, after they have more chances to die in one of these events. So what is happening here is actually we have this like our deterministic trajectory. At some moment here, we have this sudden death of many of the colonies, and the system jumps to a new configuration after going again to grow deterministically. No? Notice that here we are already in the self-thinning phase, and after the disturbance, we go again back to the recruitment phase. No? So we have this self-thinning recruitment kind of cycles. If we run now the system that we have this kind of disturbance for long times, we go to this stationary distribution of states, where we can say that, well, if we expect to measure in a random moment a colony that have been living for long times, we expect it to follow this kind of distribution. And here again, we see this power law. That is probably what the empirical biologists are measuring here, no? Because they are taking random localization of colonies, of communities, and measuring this kind of things. So probably they are just taking things that are not correlated. No? There is not a time dynamics as in the previous case. So we developed this cell structure PDE for Paramecia clavata. We include clonal and sexual reproduction, natural mortality, competition for cell resources, and we also include these extreme mortality events. We studied the deterministic dynamics and the different phases of selection, recruitment, and self-thinning. And we saw the appearance here of the intermediate size density peaks as a transit state of the system. Extreme mortality events interrupt this self-thinning phase and go back to the recruitment one. And we see this kind of pseudo oscillations to the random nature of the process. So this is the end of the talk. Now I want to just present some general conclusion of what I presented before. So regarding the type 1 versus type 2 excitability, well, just to say that there are many models that are not compatible with type 2 descriptions. So while we develop framework that are better for them. Also, we studied the mechanism behind the formation of patterns in this kind of systems. About self-organization and resilience, we study this plant soil system, where we include local and negative feedback that drives the formation of self-organized traveling structures. And we saw that these structures can increase the resilience of the ecosystem and that have very predictable phases while increasing the mortality, from turbulent to spirals to wave trains. Regarding the interspecific interaction, we study this density-dependent interacting system between two different plants. That this kind of interaction can drive non-trivial transitions in the system. And we focus in the symmetric case that describes somehow the backbone of the more general system. Regarding the Gorgonians, we include this this model to describe communities of Gorgonians, and we saw that the competition for resources can drive self-thinning and the formation of a typical distribution with a peak for intermediate size colonies. So some future perspective about some theoretical studies of type 1 excitability. It will be nice to study this transition from spatiotemporal dynamics to local dynamics in Moldetei, because I didn't focus too much in this transition when C goes to infinity. Also, we saw in some of our results that there seems to be a connection between the Eckhouse instability of wave trains and the T-point, but I don't understand it very well still. I have some intuitions, but only that. About the plant soil system, it will be nice to have some empirical validation of our model, because at the end, most of the results are theoretical and some experiments will be done to determine if what we think we are saying is actually what is happening. Also, some of the parameters could be better fit. For example, the decay of sulfide. There are not very good measurements in the field. And finally, we didn't include diffusion of toxins in our model and could play a role for the creation of Turing patterns or something that are seen in other kind of systems. For sequence interaction, one important point will be to try to expand our analysis to non-symmetrical system. Also, to test empirically the role of density-dependent interaction between plants. I know that there are some people now doing this kind of studies, but I couldn't find too much fit in the literature. Finally, for the Gorgonias, we have to fit a little bit better the parameters, because many of the ones that I used in the thesis were a little bit, not very based on biological data. And in this way, also, we can try to compare the results of our model with real observations. I would like to develop a minimal self-thinning model that could be applied to other taxas. And finally, it will be interesting to study how the frequency or the intensity of these extreme mortality events could affect the behavior of the community. So most of this thesis was published during the duration of these last years. So I just put here the different papers that were already published in peer-reviewed journals, and the working of the Gorgonias is still in process of publication. So thank you very much. That's what I have to say.
Here and complete, so there is time for observation, comments, and questions from the committee. Okay.
They are my friend, but my friends.
It was written in the unique community because some people do not see public placement.